When you and I talk about Jesus, we all have a picture of Jesus in our head. And for some, that is of a very virtuous guy that calls us to live a better life. For some, it is an amazing teacher. For some, it is a man who really got the short end of the stick. He was a martyr. He was killed by the people who should have loved him. For others, we look at him as the head of a religious organization, kind of like Mohammed or Mary Baker Eddy or L. Ron Hubbard or some of the other religious leaders. And for some, we see him as the person revealed in the Bible who is our Lord and our Savior. But what we're going to do today is we are going to expand our vision of who Jesus is. And we're going to do it in a very interesting way because we're going to do it from an Old Testament text. It's Psalm 110. Now, this is an interesting psalm because this is the most quoted psalm in the New Testament. No less than 33 times is this psalm referenced in the New Testament. Some might argue that the whole book of Hebrews is basically based on this. In fact, in the very beginning of the book of Hebrews, he quotes Psalm 110, and he says, "To whom has God ever said to an angel, 'You are my son, today I have become your father'?" He's talking to us from Psalm 110, and he goes through about how Jesus is superior to the angels, and he talks about him being great, and that God never said to somebody, "Sit at the place of honor at my right hand until I humble your enemies, making them a footstool under your feet." That's all in the book of Hebrews, and that's really the thesis of Hebrews that's developed throughout the whole book. So to a large degree, Hebrews is like a sermon on Psalm 110. Now, this psalm is interesting because it talks about Jesus being the divine king. And it starts with the very first verse where we see that Jesus is more than a man. The very first verse says this: "The Lord said to my Lord." Now, keep that up there, Kevin, because I want you to see that first verse. Notice that that word Lord in one case is in capital letters, and in the other, it is in normal case letters. And what's happening there is translators are trying to tip us off to something about the Hebrew language. When it is in capital letters, it means that the Hebrew word is actually the word Yahweh, which is the formal name for God. When Moses was being sent back to the Israelites in Egypt, he said, "God, they're going to ask me who sent me. What should I say your name is?" And he said, "Tell them that Yahweh has sent you." And it's translated, "I am." Tell them I am has sent you. So that is the formal name of God. The other Lord that's in regular case is the word Adonai. And it means master or ruler or superior. So there are two different beings being talked about here. We're reading that the Lord, the God, the Father of all mankind, spoke to some other Lord. Now, this is significant because we're going to jump over here. We'll come back to this passage, but over in Matthew chapter 22, verse 41, Jesus brings this up. It says, "Then surrounded by Pharisees, Jesus asked them a question. 'What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he?' And they replied," it's not said here, but I'm sure they went, "Duh, he is the son of David." Jesus responded, "Then why does David, speaking under the inspiration of the Spirit, call the Messiah my Lord? For David said, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit in the place of honor at my right hand until I humble your enemies beneath your feet.' Since David called the Messiah my Lord, how can the Messiah be his son?" So Jesus is arguing here that he, or the Messiah, the one who was to come, is somebody more than a man, is somebody greater than just a descendant of David. And the argument that Jesus is making is this, that look, if David was merely talking about one of his progeny, if he was just talking about one of his descendants, he would have said, the Lord said to my son, or the Lord said to my descendant. But instead, he says, the Lord said to my Lord, which means that this one who is to come, even though he is a descendant of David, is going to actually be superior to or greater than David, one that provokes service from David. And the argument is that Jesus is more than just a good man. Like I said, Hebrews picks this up and says, not even to the angels did God ever say something like this. And what we are to come away from this with is to understand the biblical revelation. And that is that the Bible tells us that Jesus was fully man. He was just like us in so many ways. He experienced everything that we did in the same way that we did. He was tempted in all manners such as we are. The only difference was he didn't sin. And yet the Bible tells us that he is fully God. Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. I have always been there. Jesus takes that title, I am, and applies it to himself. So what we have is this very confusing kind of construction that Jesus is fully God and he is fully man. Now, this would be a really good point to give you an illustration that would make this really clear, right? Yeah, I don't have one. Because there is nothing that parallels this. The doctrine of the Trinity, or even the doctrine of the humanity and deity of Jesus, is unparalleled in our world. But the Bible tells us this, and this is the message that Jesus is giving to us. He's saying, look, I am not just a good guy. I am not just one that leads the way and gives you an example to follow. I am more than that. I am God who has come to rescue you. Jesus had to be fully man in order to take our place. He had to be fully God in order for his life to be valuable enough to trade for all of our lives. He is God and he is man. But that's not all he tells us here. At the end of verse 1, he talks about the rule of Jesus. The Lord said to my Lord, sit in the place of honor at my right hand until I humble your enemies, making them a footstool under your feet. The Lord will extend your powerful kingdom from Jerusalem. You will rule over your enemies. When you go to war, your people will serve you willingly. You are arrayed in holy garments, and your strength will be renewed each day like the morning dew. Now, we read this and we say, okay, God said to Jesus, okay, you sit at my right hand. The Father said to the Son, sit at my right hand. And so we have this image that Jesus came, he lived, he died for us, he rose from the dead, he did great things. Someday in the future, he is coming back to get us and he's going to rescue us. But now in the meantime, he's kind of like sitting in the bleachers watching what's going on. He's sitting at the right hand of the Father going, well, let's see what happens. That's not what this means. When somebody sits at the right hand of the king, it means they are co-reigning with the king. They are reigning with the king. So the Son is reigning with the Father. Jesus is sitting in rule. It comes from, the theological term for this is the session of Jesus. And it comes from a Latin word, sessio, which means the sitting or to sit, the act of sitting. That sounds weird, but think about it this way. It means that, well, when the Supreme Court meets, we talk about the Supreme Court is now in session. Congress is now in session. Okay? It means that they are in there, they are sitting there, they're fighting probably, but they're sitting there and they are ruling. When they are in session, it means they are about the business of governing. So Jesus is in session in the sense that he is about the business of governing. He is still ruling in our lives. He is still governing now. We are told several things about this. First, we are told that he will be victorious. until I humble your enemies, making them a footstool under your feet. The Father says to the Son, look, you're going to be victorious. You are going to win. Now, we look at the world, and we say, I'm not so sure about that. Doesn't it seem sometimes like maybe the kingdom is losing? The answer to that is that the decisive battle has already been won. At the cross of Jesus and at the empty tomb, the decisive battle was won. The victory is certain. We are just waiting for it to be fulfilled. I just finished reading Laura Hillenbrand's wonderful book called Unbroken. And it's the story about a guy who was a World War II veteran, a guy by the name of Louis Zamperini. And a great story. The guy was an Olympic runner, great potential, and then World War II broke out. And he went into the Air Force, and he was a bombardier. And one day his plane got shot down. And he spent weeks on the Pacific in a raft, fighting off sharks and dealing with hunger. And finally, they washed ashore on a Japanese island, so they were taken as POWs. And the story goes on about how horribly they were treated and how he was beaten and how they were given basically nothing to eat and just brutalized. And then one day, all these POWs in the camp heard airplanes overhead. They went outside and they looked, and they were not what they would call the Zeros, the Japanese fighters. They were American fighters. And they recognized that America must be winning the war if they were able to fly over Japan like that. And then the story goes that one day they saw all the guards had kind of gotten very quiet and had met in the guard room. And the story that they heard was that an American bomber had dropped a single bomb on a city in Japan, and that single bomb destroyed the whole city, Hiroshima. And then they heard that a second bomber had come and dropped a single bomb and destroyed another city. And effectively at that point, the war with Japan was over. Shortly thereafter, the Japanese surrendered. And so the POWs were no longer prisoners of war because the war was over. So all the guards and the administrators of the camp left. And the POWs were there on their own. So the war was over. The decisive battle had been fought and won. But it was weeks before these POWs were rescued. It was months before they got back to their homes. And for most of them, it was years and maybe even lifetimes before they got over all that they had gone through during the war. To a large degree, that's where we are. We are POWs in Satan's world. We are being held hostage. The world is under attack. But the decisive battle, the bombs, were dropped at the cross and at the empty tomb. The victory is certain. We are just waiting for the rescuer to return to us. So the victory with Christ is going to be had. Our job is to wait. We're told that the kingdom will continue to increase. And even though it doesn't feel like this around the world, as we look at our world and we say people are falling away from the church, that may be true in America, but not around the world. Around the world, the gospel is growing and building up ahead of steam. People are rushing to the arms of Jesus and to the victory that he gives. And I'm not so sure that not in the not too distant future, the Lord will be ready to come back. And the final thing is that we are told that we are part of his army. It says that when you go to war, your people will serve you willingly. That's our job. Our job is to serve at the pleasure of our King. Our job is to take orders from our general, which is Jesus. That's our job. Our job is to continue to hang on, to continue to be faithful, to continue to do what God has called us to do until that day when he comes back to rescue us. So Jesus is more than a great man. Jesus, the Son, is continuing to rule. And then in verse 4, we're told that Jesus is our priest. He is our access to God. The Lord has taken an oath and will not break his vow. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Now, I know that as soon as you say a word like Melchizedek, everybody goes, I'm not sure I could pronounce that. And so you're thinking about, now, how did he say that? Melchizedek, okay? And now you get all focused on, who is this Melchizedek guy? What's his story? I've heard about him. What's the story with this guy? Don't miss what is being said. He's saying Jesus will not only be the king, he will also be our priest. He will be our advocate. He will be the one that brings us into the presence of the Lord. Now, this could not happen to Jews because the king was from the line of David. They had to be a descendant of David. The priests had to be a descendant of Aaron, who was the brother of Moses. The reason for that, I believe, is similar to what our country did when they divided the three parts of government, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. It's called a separation of powers. And that's basically what was happening. The idea of the separation of powers, as you know, is that these guys are supposed to be a check and balance on each other so that no one governing body has too much power, because we understand that people who are given power tend to use that power in corrupt ways. And so our founding fathers, with great wisdom, said, we got to set up a government where we got groups of people that are watching each other, because otherwise we're going to get into trouble. In a sense, that's the way that God set things up, so that the king and the priest were going to be different people. And as we look at history, what we see is that anytime a king tried to take over leadership of the church, things got messed up. And anytime the pope in history tried to become a political ruler, things got messed up, because power corrupts. What we're being told here is that the Messiah, that Jesus, the Son of God, is going to be a king and a priest. Why? Because he is incorruptible. That's not a problem with him. Now, the Jew would say that's impossible. If Jesus is a son of David, he's not going to be able to be a priest. And so the argument here that David is making, speaking by the power of the Holy Spirit, says that Jesus is going to be a priest from a different order. From the order not of Aaron, Moses' brother, but of this guy Melchizedek. So we say, who is Melchizedek? Well, we go back to the book of Genesis, and we go way back to Genesis chapter 14, and we see Melchizedek come on the scene. Abraham's nephew, Lot, had gotten into trouble. He had been kidnapped, and so Abraham went out to rescue him and defeat these armies that were holding Lot hostage. And so he defeats all these various kings. And as he's coming back victorious, we are told that this guy, the king of Salem by the name of Melchizedek, a priest of the Most High, came out to Abraham and gave him wine and bread, and Abraham gave him a tenth, a tithe, 10% of all that he had gained in battle, which is a significant act of reverence. And that's all we hear about Melchizedek. That's it. Until we get to Psalm 110, and then later until we get to the book of Hebrews. So this little passage is setting up this whole argument that David is making here. Now, what Hebrews tells us is several things. Let me give you a list. Let me give you the argument from Hebrews. Number one, the fact of Melchizedek's priesthood shows that there is a priesthood other than Aaron. In fact, Aaron's priesthood was established after Melchizedek. So this is actually an earlier, a better priesthood. Second, Melchizedek shows us that it is possible for somebody to be a king and a priest. Since Abraham was the forefather of Aaron, there is a sense, the Bible says, in which Aaron, the first high priest, was in the loins or the seed of Abraham. So since Abraham paid deference to Melchizedek, by extension, Aaron also was paying respect to Melchizedek. So the argument that the writer of Hebrews makes is that the priesthood of Israel actually serves and honors the priesthood of Melchizedek. So there's a greater priest than Melchizedek coming. The name Melchizedek itself is significant. Melchizedek means king of righteousness, and the title of king of Salem, or later on it becomes Jerusalem. The king of Salem means the king of peace. And these titles are appropriate for applying to Jesus. The argument here is that Jesus becomes our representative before God. And the writer of the Hebrews says that the priesthood of Jesus is superior for a number of reasons. Number one, he is a priest forever. He's not going to be transferred to another church. He doesn't get to the point where he retires. He doesn't become disinterested. He doesn't take a secular job. He is a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. He is going to represent us before God always. Second, his sacrifice is superior. Hebrews tells us that in the Jewish religion, those priests, their job description was pretty simple. You get up in the morning, you go to the temple, you offer a sacrifice for your own sin, and then you spend the day offering sacrifices for the sins of the people. And then tomorrow you get up and you do the same thing over and over again. The sacrifices never ended because they were insufficient. But the sacrifice that Jesus makes is one that never has to be offered again because he offers himself. And that sacrifice is sufficient not only for past sins, but for our future sin as well. And so his priesthood is so much more superior because he has done what we needed, both now and forever. And then we're told that he is continually making accurate intercession for us. You and I, we will pray for each other the best we can, but a lot of times we don't know what we should be praying for. There are a lot of times that we go in spurts. You know, I'll be praying for a while, and then for a while I just kind of drift and get off into my own little world. That doesn't happen with Christ. He ever lives to make intercession for us. He is constantly standing at the throne of the Father, saying, remember, I know you're seeing what's going on in Bruce's life, and I know it's wrong, but remember, I paid his debt. I paid for him. I took care of it. He is constantly praying for me, and he's constantly praying for you with wisdom. So Jesus is our Savior. He rules. He is our access. And in verses 5 through 7, it says he will be the judge. The Lord stands at your right hand to protect you. He will strike down many kings when his anger erupts. He will punish the nations and fill their lands with corpses. He will shatter heads over the whole earth, but he himself will be refreshed from brooks along the way. He will be victorious. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit work together in perfect harmony, in perfect oneness, to rule the world. And there is coming a day when they will stand up and judge all the world. And when that judgment comes, it will be perfect in judgment. The evil that seems to be overlooked, the wrongs that have been swept under the rug, the good that often goes unappreciated, is all going to be brought to light before the Lord. He will separate the sheep and the goats, the wheat and the weeds, the believers and the unbelievers. It may sound like fantasy, but the just, the holy, and righteous God is one day going to look at your life and he's going to look at mine. And those who do not have Jesus pleading for them will be lost forever. That's the Savior that we serve. It's not Jesus meek and mild. It's not Jesus the great teacher. It is Jesus who is Lord and King. In light of all this, I want to read you a quote from Tim Keller. Keller imagines Jesus answering a question to us. We say, well, what are we supposed to learn from this? I don't get it. This whole Melchizedek, this priesthood, this God-man thing, this is confusing. What are we supposed to learn? And this is what Keller writes. He puts words into the mouth of Jesus and writes this Christ talking to us. If you can look at me and talk to me and walk away saying, okay. If you can walk away saying, he's a good teacher, I can learn from him, he's inspirational, you have missed the point. I am not inspirational. I am devastating. If you just use me to get over the humps in your life, if you use me as an example, if you use me as somebody to refer to when you're in trouble, you have put me into a box. I'm breaking out. I am not a mere mortal. I am the judge of the earth. I am the eternal high priest. I am the way to God. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father except through me. Jesus is much more than a good man. He is the God-man. He's the only one who can save us. He's the King of kings and Lord of lords. He reigns over us. And if you understand who Jesus is, if you begin to grasp the splendor and the power and the majesty and the love and the sufficiency of Christ, then you won't serve him half-heartedly anymore. You won't worship him indifferently. You won't refer to him in a callous manner anymore. If you understand that he alone is king and deserves your allegiance, then his agenda should be your agenda, and his word should be your command and my command. So the question we face here, have we surrendered our life to this Jesus? Or have we surrendered our life to a Jesus who really doesn't exist, a Jesus of our imagination? R.C. Sproul writes this: I love the legend of Robin Hood. In one version of the story, King Richard the Lionheart leaves England to fight in the Crusades, leaving his brother Prince John in charge of the realm. John mismanages the kingdom for his own benefit, forcing Robin and others to become outlaws. Robin and his compatriots, known as his merry men, live in Sherwood Forest, evading John and his henchmen, the sheriff of Nottingham. The merry men are known for their joy, but they are also known especially for their loyalty. They want to protect the realm until the king comes home. Sproul writes, my favorite part of the story happens near the end when Richard, the true king, returns to England in the guise of a monk. At an inn, he hears talk about Robin Hood and his opposition to Prince John, so he purposely travels through Sherwood Forest. Suddenly, Robin and his men waylay Richard and his fellow travelers and try to relieve the king of his purse. The king asks Robin, why are you doing this? Robin replies, because of my allegiance to my king. Then Richard pulls off his monk's garments and displays the lion and the cross on his chest. Robin recognizes him and falls on his knees, saying, my liege. In the end, Richard knights Robin because of his faithfulness during the absence of the king. And Sproul concludes this way: I love that story as a metaphor for the church. Our king is seated on the right hand of God. He expects us, his people, to remain loyal to him while the whole world goes for Prince John. In time, he will return and put all things right. So the question for us is this: are we willing to stand with the king, even though other forces threaten us and entice us? If you really understand who Jesus is, then you will not hesitate to answer, I will serve you, my King, in whatever way you ask. And you will do so, not out of obligation or compulsion. You will do so because you recognize that he alone is our true Lord and King. So let's talk to him. Our Lord, our King, our Master, our Advocate, our High Priest, our sufficient sacrifice, we bow before you. Forgive us for the times when we diminish your character, when we treat you as if you are like us, rather than seeing you as the majestic Lord that you are. We thank you that you rule, that you have not left the throne vacant. You sit there, and your kingdom is in session. So deliver us from the discouragement that we sometimes see as we look around us. When we feel that things are out of control, that you have lost your grip, remind us that you have lost none of your power or your authority, that you are just waiting to seal up the victory that has already been won at Calvary and in the garden tomb. Help us, Father, to live as your servants in this hostile world. Help us to be faithful to you. Help us to honor you with our lives and our words and our actions before men, so that you might be praised and honored, for you deserve it. Help us to this end, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.